Welcome to Be the Lion 365. I'm Pastor Jake. I hope everybody's having a great weekend. I hope everybody has a blessed week. If you need prayers, leave them comment down below and we'll be praying for you. We're going to jump into this week. You know, we have been talking about the journey we've been taking for the last couple of weeks. We've done it in faith. We have to take our journey in faith. We have to take our journey in hope. You know, that our hope is in God at the end of it. The next thing the journey we're going to be taking is our journey in love. And I got all this from 1 Corinthians 13:13. It says, "And now abide faith, hope, and charity. And the greatest of these is charity," which charity is love. You know, I like the word charity better because charity means that you're actually doing something. You know, it's not just a feeling you have. We always have this whole thing about love is love. Well, God's love is not like any other love. Not like our love here on earth. Our love here on earth is a different kind of love. It can let you down. You know, I always tell somebody, you know, how many times somebody out there said, you know, they love somebody, and then 10 years from now, you don't even remember the people's names. See, that's called that earthly love. That earthly instead of a heavenly love of the Father. And we have to remember that because, like I said, love is not just love. Love with God is on a different level. You know, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of His attributes because God's love. You know, He said charity, which I'm going to use the word charity, so it's the same, okay? Because with people with NIV Bibles and all them, they're going to say, well, it says love here. Well, the King James says charity. Like I said, I like charity because it's the act of something. It's actually doing something instead of just saying, "Oh, I love you," and then walking off. It's kind of like I said, with being married. If you only tell your loved ones that you love them once a week, twice a week, you know, they wonder sometimes. That's why we have problems in marriages, because you don't tell the person you love that you really truly love them. You know, but see, this with God is we do this. We ignore God. So God tells us, okay, we're here. I'm going to show you what love truly is. He says, charity suffereth long, and is kind. It does not envy. It is not vaulted up itself. In other words, not puffed up. Doesn't behave seemly. Doesn't seek its own. So that's one thing about the love we have. It's a very conceited love. It's a more self-centered love. Instead of being with God's love, which is just everywhere. You know, does not seek its own, is easily not provoked. This is one thing I see a lot in a lot of Christians out there is anger, myself included. Is that anger we get when we shouldn't have to be angered. You know, we think about it. You know, in my life, I can see why God wanted to strike me down several times. The things I've done, the things I've said, was not with Him. You know, if God ain't been merciful and God ain't been loving like He is, then I've been wiped completely off this earth. Most of us would. You know, God's anger is slow. You know, and that's great. You know, because that's the kind of love it has to be, where you're not getting mad at the person you're with. Not being mad at people because they cut you off in traffic. Not mad because a waitress didn't bring your little condiment on time in your eyes. See, it's love is patient, love is kind. And that's what we need to be. That's the kind of love we need to be striving for in our journey. And He says, you know, charity never fails. Love never fails. He says it bears all things, believeth all things, hope all things, which is talking about God, endureth all things. No matter what you go through, you know, do it with love and joy. You think, well, that's not right. Well, God says joy in the tribulations. Be happy that you are going through them, because there are more. Everybody has problems. Everybody on this earth has a problem. No matter how rich you are, how poor you are, everyone has a problem. And the one thing that we see is that we don't have enough love to get us through these problems. Not enough joy. You know, when I had money, I had more problems when I had money than when I didn't have money. I could compare the two. And the thing about it is, you got to find joy in it. Find love in it. Because if you're always miserable and sad, it's like an old proverb. Misery loves company. And it does. I've seen a lot of people who are not have no joy in their life, no happiness in their life. They want everybody else to be as miserable as they are. They'll start problems, cause problems. And this is not being a Christian. You know, I always get mad about it because people always say, well, they're not acting Christian, they're Christian, but they are, wait, excuse me. You know, he's a Christian, but he's not acting like it. Well, that's what the word means, to be Christ-like, to live our life as Christ did, to not be rivaling against people, not causing people problems, not trying to hurt people. That ain't Christ. That's selfishness. That's worldly. There is a difference. You know, we need to quit watering down the word of Christ and start being back where it needs to be. Put back in our hearts. Quit letting our hearts go hard. You know, Colossians 3:14 says it. And above all things, put on charity. Put on love, which is the bond of perfectness. That's how easy it is. Just put on love. When you're having a fight with somebody, just say, okay, I understand, and move on. We can't do that. We got to be right. We got to be so right, the problem escalates to the same thing as James talks about the tongue. It is a fire. You can cause a lot of pain for somebody. You can cause a lot of problems for somebody, yourself, just by the stuff that comes out of your mouth. So we need to put on that charity of love to people. You know, we see this in a journey. In Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37, is about the Good Samaritan. Now, before this, an attorney, a Pharisee asked, which he was attorney, asked Jesus, well, who is your neighbor? Jesus says, well, I'm going to tell you a parable. I'm going to tell you a parable about this man. He got all his stuff ready, you know, started going on a journey. Well, on this journey, he gets robbed and beaten and left on the side of the road, almost for dead. He said that during this time, a priest came by, looked at him in the ditch, went on the other side, and walked away. He said a little bit later, another man came, looked, seen him, turned away, and walked away. He said this one man, he was a Samaritan. Now, Samaritan Jews, this man who was beaten and done was a Jew. In this, excuse me, in this parable, and Jews and Samaritans were enemies. He said the Samaritan seen him in the ditch and had compassion on him, got him up, cleaned him up, put him on a mule, rode him to an inn, which is like a hospital, had him taken care of, gave them, the next morning gave the owner of the inn some money and said, take care of him. If he needs more attention, let me know. He said, Jesus says, this is a good neighbor. Because you want somebody to do this for you. You'd want the same thing out of this. This is love. This is that journey of love. That Samaritan, when he was going through and he seen this man, he had compassion on him. He had love on him. This is God's love. These other people walking by, they probably went home and told their parents or their family, I love you, you know, and hugged their children and all this stuff. Where was their love at? Their love wasn't for anybody but themselves. It was self-centered love. And that's worldly. Like I said, not all love is love. I do, like I said, I do get aggravated when I hear that. Well, love is love. No, it's not. There is a difference in it. A complete difference. And we got to know it. You know, he says in 1 John 4, 7 through 8, it says, Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God. And everyone that loveth is born of God, and knoweth God. And he that loveth not, knoweth not God, for God is love. See, God is the true love. Everything here on earth is just a facsimile of. It's not real love. It's not true love. We try, don't get me wrong, a lot of people try, but it's never going to come to the love that God has. because God is love. He is the source of it. He is the source of happiness and joy, you know. And I've seen this when you look at two different groups, and you'll see, how they interact with each other. You have this worldly love. It interacts a different way. The people be happy and smiling, but in the next moment it could be chaos, fighting, just nastiness. Where you see people who truly do love each other, doesn't matter what happens, what somebody says, it's all right. It's good. See, that's true love. That is godly love. When you're sharing your differences and you're okay with it. In 1 Peter, and above all things, 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 8, says, above all things, have fervent charity among yourselves, for charity shall cover the multitude of sins. See, that love, what we do in our life, all the stuff we've done, Jesus washed it away. By his blood, we are cleansed. He said, but on this, those sins, put on some love. Give it a little bit of love. Help people. Do it out of your heart, not because you have to, not because that you just need to, because I've been there where I just need to do that. Just go ahead and do it. It's kind of like the two sons. The father comes to him and he says, go into the field and work today. And he said, no, I don't want to do that. And then he went his way. He went to the second son and says, go into the field and work today. And he said, yeah, I'll do it. But then he didn't. The other one, the first one he went and asked, he said, no, he didn't want to do it. But then he turned around later on and went in anyways and worked. Because that was love. He that was the worldly kind of love. It's like, okay, I don't want to do it, but I'll go ahead and do it anyways. And that's kind of, it's not godly. When God asks you something, let your yes be a yes and your no be a no. That's how easy it is. In 1 John chapter 14 verse 15 says, if you love me, love my commandments. This is a big one because a lot of people don't want to even hear God's word. Why? Because it always has this whole thing that churches say, oh, it steps on our toes. In other words, it causes pain. No one wants to live like God says because it's not their lifestyle. It's not an earthly thing to do. But see, we're not earthly people. When you become a child of God, you're a spiritual person serving a spiritual God. So we need to put on this kind of love that we do as God commands. What he says, live by his word. Live by the Bible. That's how easy it is. It says the simplicity of Christ. It's easy. Love people as you would yourself. Love God with all your heart, your mind, your strength. And that's how easy it is. Deny yourself. God will take care of you. Deny yourself and go help somebody else. But do it with a good heart. In Matthew chapter 7, I'm giving a kind of verses here because, like I said, I'm just trying to explain to you who God is and by his love. These things therefore, all things whatsoever you would that man should do to you, do you even to them. For this is the law of the prophets. Is that law, that neighbor law, that neighbor love. To love people with your heart, to have compassion on them, to not try to fight, to step back when somebody's arguing with you, say, okay, just don't say this. This is one of my pet peeves. I do not like this expression. Let's agree to disagree. I do not like that. In other words, you're saying, this is my opinion, you don't like it, that's your problem. But you just say, okay, no problem. That's all you have to say. You don't have to say anything else to people. Just say, okay, thank you. And go on. Now, there will be people who want to fight with you because that's worldly. Even if they call themselves a Christian, it's still worldly stuff. And we're not worldly people. We're spiritual people. Like I said, that the Good Samaritan shows us how to love. Is to have compassion. To have love for people. You know, in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, it tells you what kind of love God is. He is the one that does good, who helps, who feeds the poor, you know, who are out there. You know, this is one thing that you got to remember. Jesus, when he was sitting there, I think it's in Matthew chapter, I'll have to add it down below. He's sitting there talking about the sheep and the goats. And before this, he says, you know, when you didn't do this stuff. And he said, when we're supposed to do this stuff, when we're supposed to feed the poor, when we're supposed to go to visit people in prison, when we're supposed to go see people in the hospital, when we're supposed to clothe people, when we're supposed to do this. He said, when you didn't do it to the least. In other words, when you didn't do it to a brother, when you didn't do it to a neighbor, he said, these are the people that you should have been doing stuff to. You know, it didn't matter if you were sitting up there in that pew or on that pulpit and you were preaching God for years. It doesn't matter. If your heart ain't right, you ain't right with God. You're doing it for the wrong reasons. You need to be up there doing out of love because you don't want people to go to hell. You don't want people to see all the anguish and the pain they're going to go through. You're doing it because you love God. Not because of a paycheck, not because of you've done it all your life and this is what you think. It's not about a religion. It's not about a doctrine. What it's about is the Word of God and that you're preaching it. I always give this out because it seems to be a kind of just a twisted up moment there with a lot of people. Well, my religion or my whatever says this and this is how we do it. Well, Jesus telling you on this is this gets you into a bad place. It'll get you going to the left, and that's a bad place. Those that lake in fire and brimstone. He said you got to find love, and only love that you'll ever find is true is God, because He is love. He is the true love. And that's why in this journey, when we're going doing stuff out there, let's do it in love. When we're driving to work and somebody cuts you off, wave at them, say thank you, let them go on. When somebody says something rude to you, say okay. That's how easy it is. Not blow up, not throw a fit. It's not about you. Okay? Take you out of the equation, put God in. That's how easy it is. Y'all have a blessed week. We love you out there. Like I said, if you want to give, there's PayPal and there's Tidely. Either one of those, it should be a link to it. And we love you. Y'all have a blessed week. Like I always say, keep going forward. Keep moving forward. Keep doing God's will.